Like I wouldn't keep a dependency in place for the sake of collaboration.
Sure.
I would rather have collaboration across very distinct service boundaries.
Yeah.
And so if I need a dependency to foster collaboration, I've got two problems. I got a collaboration problem and I have a dependency problem. And, and it's like, and, you get this argument that, some dependencies are just necessary.
Yeah.
But I do think that this idea of runtime versus build time, interdependence versus dependence versus codependence.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's something in that metaphor too, because yes, it's like there are inevitable relationships between objects in complex systems.
Okay.
That is unavoidable. That is different than the kind of the runtime dependencies, build time dependencies that we're talking about. Like, we self-impose dependencies all the time. Like, we make things connect via requirement that don't have to connect if we just thought about the requirements differently. We introduce dependencies between teams when we do simple things like share QA people between two teams, right? And
right.
I know if we're Agilists, like maybe we don't need dedicated QA. We're all doing testing on our own. I get it, right? I'm not being dogmatic. In reality, most organizations have QA people, right? So it's like if I'm putting QA people on both teams versus having a shared QA component, I've created a dependency organizationally.
Sure.
Right? If I've separated the software by layer and nothing can be delivered, not even stubbed out or toggled on and off, it all has to be delivered and tested simultaneously, then I've created a dependency that I don't believe any gain in collaboration would be worth the cost of that dependency in terms of my business operations.
Hey, this is Dave Pryor. Welcome to Leading Agile Sound Notes. Mike Kottmeyer's back. Mike, thank you for taking time out of the beginning of your Memorial Day weekend.
I was going to say the beginning of my morning. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday.
Memorial Day.
And I've been on camera recording and on Zoom calls all day long. So yeah, let's see. I actually have like a vein or something pop. Maybe it's a shadow or something. Okay, cool.
Veins are mysteriously popping out in Mike's head from Zoom exposure. What we're going to talk about. So a week or so ago, our marketing team or somebody in our marketing team asked some questions of the internet. What are the most controversial tweets?
Well, no. So what happened was
can't even keep it straight in my head.
Yeah, like I said, it's been a long day. So what I do, every week I do a content brief, and it becomes like fodder for podcasts and videos and stuff like that. So I actually spend a minute or two thinking about this stuff. And the other day I was in this situation where I couldn't get anything out of my head. So I ended up writing like what is ultimately going to be like 23 tweets, and I thought they were kind of neat. And so we haven't decided how we're going to do that yet. But anyway, I posted them on our internal Slack channel. Kind of our chief architect around here, a guy named Kevin Smith, put them into ChatGPT, and he said, rank these in order of controversy, and then take the top 10 of them and rebut them is what he did. And so we started going through that list. So this is our second. This is actually becoming a series, Dave.
Yes.
This is our second most controversial tweet.
All right.
Yeah.
Dependencies kill agility. You either have to manage dependencies or break dependencies. The more dependencies you choose to keep, the less agile you will be. It's impossible to move with agility when everything is connected to everything else.
That's true.
In response to that, ChatGPT said, when dependencies may pose challenges to agility, they can also foster collaboration and synergy. It's about managing dependencies effectively, not eliminating them outright. That was a pretty thoughtful response, actually.
Yeah, that was the thing that blew me away, is that they were all thoughtful. Most of them are really wrong, but they were thoughtful. Because I think the best ChatGPT can do is reflect the common thinking. Mm-hmm. So the second half of that was kind of in the space of you have to manage them when they exist, which is 100% true, right? So I would always say that you have to either manage dependencies or break dependencies. You just can't ignore them. And the beef that I have with some of the Agile community sometimes is that the methodologies we create don't respect dependencies, and they don't treat them as first order concerns. And so the belief is that they'll either be self-organized out of the system, In practice, they tend to be identified and resolved late, and it causes instability of velocity. It causes incomplete features, and so they're very difficult, right? So the one thing I really disagreed with was the idea that dependencies foster collaboration. Yeah, sure, I guess. Like, yeah, I gotta collaborate with you to work it out, but to me, it doesn't like.
Well, it's an opportunity for collaboration.
Like a strong argument. So,
I think in the same way that if in a Kanban board, when stuff gets jammed up, it's an opportunity for the team to swarm on something. I mean, they have that opportunity anyway. They don't have to wait for a dependency to occur to collaborate.
Well, so it was interesting, right? So I have a lot of really smart people that work in leading Agile, and I was talking with one of the guys on our studios team, and he made a distinction, which I usually communicate a little bit differently because I'm not a developer. But he talked about the idea of runtime versus build time dependencies. Okay. And the distinction was basically like, if I have a dependency, I don't know, this is probably like maybe not the right way to say it, so I'm on thin ice here, but like that's going to prevent me from compiling the software. Okay. Or let's say I code something around the API and I break the data model in the database. Okay. Like there's dependencies that are like architecturally problematic.
Sure.
And then he makes the distinction between the build time versus the runtime. And so as I understand runtime, like a runtime dependency is like, if I have like a front end that relies on an API, I can develop those separately and manage it through like stubs and feature toggles and things like that. So I can make them architecturally independent from a build perspective, but when they run, both halves have to be together in order to get the full blown functionality. And if I don't have the back half, then I have to toggle the front half off. Something like that, right? And I think it's important, right? So I probably have some developers here losing their mind, but I'm not largely talking to developers, right?
But that's not going to stop you anyway.
Well, I'm largely talking to Scrum Masters and leaders and things like this. And so we have to understand what we mean. And so a lot of times I'll make a distinction, because I'm a Stephen Covey guy, of the idea of dependence versus interdependence. And it's like, and like in that, like, so my wife and I are a parenting team. I am an independent human being, and I am perfectly capable totally on my own. If I had to parent my kids by myself, I could. My wife is a perfectly capable human being. If she had to parent the kids by herself, she absolutely could. We are independent people.
Yep.
But we have a interdependent relationship in the sense that we rely on each other in real time to be able to parent our kids better.
Sure.
And so I am independent, and I choose interdependence with my spouse. Okay. Now, so I got one. This is interesting. My brain just connected an interesting dot. So a build time dependency would be like codependence. I can't be okay unless you're okay.
All right.
That's a late Friday, but that's actually, I think, kind of true, right? So you have the idea of independence, interdependence, and codependence.
Okay.
And in a build time dependency is a codependence, which is typically, I think, generalized unhealthy, because I need to be okay even if you're not okay, right? Yeah. And if you've had anybody in your family or friend group that's like dealt with addiction, like that's a big thing, right? Because like as a human, like I tend to like I'm so dependent on that other person's well-being. I enable until like they hit rock bottom, kind of a deal.
Yeah.
So in like family recovery kinds of things, they talk about the idea of you have to be, we want to break these codependent patterns. I think there's actually something there. I think
I'm thinking that too, because there's also the behaviors you learn as part of a family with that kind of dysfunction. Everybody takes on a certain role, and within the organization, teams, aspects of the system, they learn to work in a constrained way that's hard to unlearn.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually really interesting.
Look at us.
I had no idea this was going to go this deep in this direction. Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, there's something to unpack there. I think I'm going to probably spend the weekend thinking about that, right? That's pretty cool.
So I had somebody today in a Lean Coffee bring up a question that I wasn't really sure how to answer. So I'm going to share this with you, and it's tied to this. When We did a lean coffee, and it's a person that works in an organization with a lot of legacy systems that are heavily dependent upon one another. You can't touch anything without affecting everything else.
Classic.
And they're really struggling with building new stuff at the same time as trying to deal with the technical debt and all that. And she was asking, how should you split the large legacy system into more manageable domains?
Okay. So
I figured this was going to be a nice meaty steak for you to take
perfect.
on.
This is like right in the space that has my brain noodling around, because, gosh, I could like fork this in like 10 different directions. So I'm going to give like the simple answer, and then we'll see where it goes. And I'm going to say the simple answer. I'm going to point it in a simple direction. So one of the things that we talk about, and this is the guidance that I give to our teams and to our clients, when we go in to an early stage transformation, we'll usually do a phase we call define the end state. And to some degree, almost every client that calls us has some version of this problem. And the way I'll describe it is we'll look at the business architecture, like a heat map of the business capabilities. Okay. We'll look at like, again, I don't know if this is the right term exactly, like the product model hierarchy. Like we want to look at like the product decomposition kind of framework. And we'll look at the org design, and we'll look at the technology architecture. And the way I've often described it is like an ideal Scrum team is when I get as much alignment between those four views as I can. Mm-hmm. If I can get you think about it, like a business problem with a dedicated team, ideally organized around a product that has encapsulated technology. That's in effect a technical definition of a Scrum team, right? Yep. And when I have dependencies between that object and the rest of the software architecture, then I have a dependency I either have to break or I have to manage, right? And to some degree, a build time dependency would be way more complicated than a runtime dependency. And what she's describing are build time dependencies. Okay. Because they have, in effect, a monolith. They're not organized around a decoupled kind of open architectural system. Mm-hmm. And so when they change one thing, it breaks a bunch of other things. So they're trying to add new features in while they're repairing defects and refactoring this code, right? Yep. And they can't prioritize within their own system, right? Yeah. So the one thing, I'm a pretty strong believer in this, and this is, again, I think part of the problem of when you don't install Scrum with a awareness of the architectural and structural implications, and you're doing it from a ground up perspective where you don't have the support of the organization to fix it. The answer to this person's question, and this is some new language for me. So I mentioned that we use this idea of business capability modeling. Mm-hmm. Well, I had my studio in town last Friday, and we were talking about that concept. And one of like my senior guys, a guy named James Hester, said something about like what you're really talking about is domain-driven design. Mm-hmm. And I went, interesting. Like, tell me more. But so he explored this idea of domains, and James wanted to go into kind of a semantic argument with me over, domains mean something and it's really relevant and we should use the word domain. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care. It's fine. But you should explain, what do you mean when you say domain-driven design? Well, like a domain, right? So it's kind of a new concept to me, but what I'm anchoring into is basically when we want our software organized around business problems. So domain, a business domain, right? We want our software organized around business domain. That is another way of saying that I want my technology architecture and my business capabilities to be in alignment. Mm-hmm. So I was testing with my organization this week. I said, what if, because you see, my challenge that I have is like, I'm not trying to convince developers to do the right thing most of the time. Right. And trying to get them to understand. I'm trying to get business leaders to understand the importance of creating the right conditions so that the developers can do the right thing. Right. And that requires a different language, like it's a different set of metaphors that you have to do, right? And so when I was testing a hypothesis, and I said, okay, so what if I said this to be true? Because business people often understand the idea of business architecture. Often we go into a company and we say, have you ever had Deloitte or McKinsey or whatever come in and do a business architecture of your organization? And they walk to the old dusty binder, they pull it off, and I got pages and pages and pages of business capability models, right? Yeah. I mean, I joke, right? But it's like that's what they have, right? Right. But they don't know what to do with it. They don't know what to do with it, but they understand that this is a representation of the capabilities that the business has.
Okay.
And so now I've got the developer community saying, okay, we understand this thing called domain-driven design. And so I say, okay, cool. So what if I said to business people sitting at the table and the developers and architects sitting at the other side of the table, and I said, look, what I want you to do is I want your business architecture to overlay your domain-driven design. So the business capabilities you identify on this side map to the domains that are driven on this side. Would that be true? And, again, like everything in technology and business, it's nuanced and probably requires a lot of conversation. But I think in general, that should be true.
So you're saying that they should, this is the part where I'm trying to track with you. You're saying they should line up. And I guess the question I'm asking is like, okay, so they don't. What is the win there? What do you get out of that?
So what I'm suggesting, and this is debate we always get into, right? So the people that come to your class do not have the agency to make these changes.
Correct.
They've been given permission to do Scrum. And I will tell you, right? And this
or
is
to take a class in how to do Scrum.
Well, this is a transient pattern, right? So one of the things that I'll go deep into my teams with sometimes, it's like when you're getting started in a transformation, you can identify an idealized end state. I could do, using these words, I could do the business architecture and I could do the domain-driven design. I could overlay them. But to get started often, we're dealing with layers and technology and different things, right? It's so these are hard problems to solve right out of the gate. But in order to achieve really the benefits of it, then it really must happen over time.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and this might be a first step, is that you'll organize around those components where it's not overlaid. And then, but you have to orchestrate across those layers, right? And that is a suboptimal place to be, right? And so the strategy of transformation is say, okay, cool. I can actually get some business agility. And this is where you manage dependencies or you break dependencies. So if I organize in a way that is suboptimal, I'm not organized around business capabilities or domains, and I'm organized around some layering that's already in the existing architecture, or I'm leveraging what the teams are already formed around.
Right.
Well, then I have to put in a orchestration layer because any feature is going to require user stories across different layers or components within the system.
Okay.
And the way that you can create agility out of that is you get those layers or components to reduce their batch size, right? So they're delivering more frequently. And then you get the features smaller, so they're delivering more frequently. And you take the feature, you decompose it into stories, it goes out to all the different people, teams, and then it rolls up and then the feature moves. And there's integration testing. Is that Agile? No, it's not Agile. Like it's not what we're supposed to do, but it is a way of achieving agility in the presence of a suboptimal organization.
So in this suboptimal approach, I'm assuming that there are plenty of instances where that's the battle you choose to fight because given all the other stuff that's going on, like this is the easiest way through for right now, and we'll fix it later. But that we're just going to
maybe or maybe not, right? So one of the things, it's really hard to articulate because if you have an organization that's in total chaos and you want to move them, and for the record, I'm just going to drop a phrase that I don't think we've defined is like, sometimes we get into this world where somebody wants to create a product-driven organization. Well, what's a product-driven organization? Well, it's basically one where you have the business capabilities aligned with the domains, and you create encapsulation, and you create funding for that particular set of business problems, right? So a product-driven organization basically organizes around products and funds products, and those products can release independently. And so what you find is that if you're really serious about this, and again, like, Dave, it's like I'm always in this place where I'm not really talking to how to help make Scrum Masters' lives easier. Like the result of what I talk about will make Scrum Masters' lives easier. It'll actually make them sane, right? It'll make it rational. It'll make Scrum make sense to them. But what I'm fundamentally talking to are business leaders that want to operate with greater agility. They need to put things into market faster. They might be in the middle of a cloud migration. They might be in the middle of trying to figure out which parts of their system they can onshore or offshore. They have real business problems that they're trying to do. They're trying to maximize value density and throughput and do it in an economically responsible way. But they're sitting on top of these legacy monoliths and poor organizational design, and they think Agile is going to solve the problem, and it's not. What happened, man? I got like the top of your head on my screen.
Sorry, I'm making a note.
Oh, that's okay. It was like all of a sudden.
No, I want to ask a follow-up question about this, and I just had to make a note. I didn't realize it went off camera. You don't like the top of my head?
So what we're doing, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, look, if you have something like a gigantic cloud migration initiative, or you're going through some, maybe that's part of some digital transformation strategy.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how to create dynamic digital capabilities into your marketplace.
Yeah.
And I have a legacy monolith that I can't change anything without breaking 10 other things.
Right.
There is nothing inherently, and we're just going back to our core thread that we always talk about. There's nothing inherently in Scrum that will solve that problem unless you organized in a way that you organized around products, and then somehow that team could decouple themselves from the rest of the enterprise. But that just doesn't happen in practice.
Well, so I want to ask a question about this. So we got that monolith, and all the developers are like, this monolith is the problem. It's the root of all evil. Yeah. But the executive's like, cloud computing, digital transformation. Like, those are big, exciting things. And fixing the thing that you're saying sucks. We've been using it this way forever.
But here's the thing. Cloud migration, digital transformation is this.
Okay.
Right? It is this. Right? And so again, it always comes back to what is the benefit that you're looking for, right? So if you're moving into a cloud environment and what you're going for is, I just want to use their servers instead of my servers. Mm-hmm. Okay, right? I can take my monolith, I can move it to the cloud. I think I got turned on. I'm kind of exploring some of these ideas out in the open, so hopefully I don't sound like a dumbass. But it's cloud, like what do they call it? Cloud enabled, mm-hmm. right? I can take my monolith, I can move it to the cloud. It's cloud enabled. It's in the cloud. It's got some benefits of being in the cloud. Right. It's not cloud native. Right?
You didn't build it to work in the cloud.
At the other extreme, you have like a microservices architecture mm-hmm. that based upon performance demand, things like that, you can scale them up, you can scale them down, we can have other instances, we can have fallback, we can have a bunch of different things, right? It can be very dynamic. You get all the benefits of being in the cloud. And so if you're truly going through a digital transformation, you're truly going through a cloud migration, like what you should really do is you should, what we were talking about, look at your business architecture, look at your domain-driven design, overlap them, create an extraction strategy for decoupling them, wrap them in tests, make them modular, move them, those containers up into the cloud, right? And make it more of a cloud native solution.
Yeah.
And so this thing I've been talking about, systems first, then practices, then culture, like I'm learning how to talk about it differently so maybe people will hear me differently. And it gets into just what we're saying. It's like there is no way to be agile. There is no way to be more digital. There is no way to be more open if we're dealing in monoliths. Mm-hmm. There's not. And there are plenty of scenarios where it doesn't make sense. Maybe a product's end of life. Maybe it's not a strategic capability. It's not worth the investment of the time or the risk to break it into its components or services and to move it into the cloud. Like, cool, that's fine. Like, don't do it. Yeah. But you can't do lean startup in that environment. You can't do something that's inherently team based and requires decoupled teams.
Well, I have a great example. Can I share an example? So one of the clients that I work with, they've been on a transformation journey for like 7 years. And
I think we talked about these folks one time.
They purchased another company.
Yeah.
It's a financial institution. They purchased another place that had full continuous integration, continuous deployment, releasing like all day long.
I bet you they drugged them into their abyss, didn't they?
They had to shut it all down because the rest of the organization couldn't cope with the change. Yeah. And there's no way to know like what's going to happen downstream.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's literally the dependencies are what has stalled out their agile transformation.
Right. Yeah. So what you do, and so if you had, if that acquired company had like fully distributed systems, containerized microservices in the cloud, and again, I'm on the edge of my technical understanding of this. And what I might do is I might say, okay, let's look at the domain driven design of that solution. Let's overlay a business capability model to it. Let's look at the business capability model of the legacy organization.
Right.
Let's hypothesize a domain driven design of that. And then at some point, there's some sort of like technology rationalization that has to start to happen. Which capabilities do we want to host where? Which, but it's such a complex topic to talk about casually like this. But it's like there's no amount, again, I just keep going back to there's no amount of Scrum that's going to do that for you.
Sure.
I mean, those systems have to be engineered to operate with this low orchestration, high encapsulation kind of strategy.
I think where I keep coming back to is like, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would dispute what you're saying, but when they want to wave their arms and have the world be different, sending people off to training is faster and easier than like, let's spend 5 years fixing our technical debt.
It's nice. You spend 5 years fixing it if you want to be relevant in 5 years. Like, I mean, this is probably a bad metaphor, but I live in Atlanta, and if you've driven through Atlanta 2 a.m, 8 a.m, noon, it's like our traffic is hell here. Probably on par with New York or LA, maybe a little bit better, but not a whole lot, right? And so I happen to have a really good friend who runs traffic for the state of Georgia, and they're doing this major interchange where Georgia 400 intersects I-285 on the north end. And what's crazy is that they're doing this gigantic thing, and they believe in 10 years that it will be on par with the capacity that the city will need in 10 years. And so they're making these billions of dollars of investment just to keep up. Now, I don't know what you would do, right? I don't know how you would build for the 10 years after that or whatever. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. But
do you really need more people living in Atlanta?
Oh, gosh, man. It's like I maybe I'm part of the problem. I got here 25 years ago, but at least my kids are for the most part native born, so they can say they were born here. But
hold on. So now, if I'm thinking of the right stretch of road, when I'm on 85 going on a 400, that's like a 2-lane ramp. I mean, that's not a So
what happens is 85, like Atlanta's like a circle. And so the point where 400 splits off, I think it splits off and goes like this, but it splits off from 85.
Yeah.
Basically 400 goes due north, and 85 comes out at about like 2 or 3 o'clock.
But that's the part where the traffic gets better when I get on 400.
No, it depends on time of day. So coming from downtown about to 285, because 285 is a nightmare both directions about that time. And then once you get like outside the perimeter, it all kind of jams up because you have all the north side traffic that's merging in, and everybody's heading out to the suburbs up in Alpharetta and coming, Buford, where I live. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, so it's like, so getting back to our systems metaphor, like the companies that don't make these investments, they're not going to be able to keep up. They're not going to be able to respond to change. They're not going to be able to take their systems and modernize them. They're not going to, right?
Or they're going to keep having to have these compensating things that never really fix the problem. And it just it's like when somebody gets older and they have to start taking medicine for one thing, and then you need something to fix that medicine, and then another medicine to fix that medicine.
Yeah, there's some truth to that, right? And again, like it's like I've read some articles recently where people are getting tired of the metaphor of technical debt, but I think there's some truth to it. So it's like if I make $100,000 a year, but I'm living $140,000 a year lifestyle, and so I'm accumulating $40,000 of debt every year. In order to pay down that debt, I not only have to go back to $100,000 a year, I have to reduce by $40,000 to start paying off the debt. And because I'm accumulating interest, probably even more than that. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem that a lot of companies are facing, is that they've been living on debt for so long, and their apparent throughput through the system is actually, ironically higher than it probably would have been otherwise.
Okay.
And so yeah, some of these companies have some hard decisions to make, right? And what I think you have to kind of do is, like, when you come in and you do that business capability modeling and the domain driven design, like, what you have to do is you have to economically prioritize which capabilities are the right capabilities to extract, which are going to be the highest levers, which need to change the most. And, in our 4 quadrants model, I do predictable, adaptable, emergent, convergent. And so I have this idea of predictive convergent. That's kind of like Gartner mode 1, things that need to be very stable and predictable. And then in the upper right, you have like Gartner mode 2, which is the stuff that's more like lean startup, incredibly experimental. And we kind of draw this Basecamp journey, Basecamp 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we articulate a change management strategy to take it from one to the other.
Sure.
Most of the large companies we go into, roughly 60%, let's say, can stay in that lower left quadrant. Legacy monoliths. You're going to do some Agile. You're going to do some lean program and portfolio management. But it's going to feel like largely incremental and iterative, plan-driven work, because there's so many dependencies. Those dependencies have to be orchestrated. Okay. And there's going to be some set of capabilities that are going to be highly strategic that you're going to want to extract out and make them incredibly resilient and high performing.
Okay.
And then some subset of that might need to change business model and say, okay, you're going to be really experimental and go take over the world. Sometimes this is actually something we see kind of commonly, is that you might have like a more legacy organization and they go and they do something off to the side and it's really successful. And then they've got to figure out how to bring it back into the more standard operating model that's more legacy. Like, that's kind of an interesting set of problems too.
Sure.
But again, it's like one of the things that's rolling around in my head a lot, and I'm probably just going to talk about it out in the open until somebody tells me either I've got the wrong stuff or I'm not thinking about it the right way.
Okay.
But there's like this, I think it's a DoD spec. I got introduced to it through a client we had that was a government contractor, came through an Air Force requirement for Agile Open Digital in the military. And I think that's, as I've really thought about that, I think that's a really neat model, because what all of these companies are trying to do, or the military is trying to do, is to make a more modular, more open product architecture, right? It's kind of similar to what like Tesla and SpaceX are doing with how they're building products. So you have an open modular architecture that's surrounded by tests. You start to have the idea of digital twins. Right. You have continuous integration, continuous deployment on a service bus. The hardware can iterate dynamically based upon new things we're learning and feedback.
Sure.
And it can iterate indefinitely under configuration management, and as long as it's passing the integration tests between the two.
Yeah.
And you start to create this world where the hardware is soft, but in these worlds, the existing manufacturing, the existing assembly lines are not going to accommodate this kind of Agile Open Digital specification. It's going to require a total rethinking of not only the existing architecture of the current hardware, but it's going to require a different mindset and methodology, a different approach to how you govern the flow of work across these things. Okay. And so I had some of my team over to my house last Monday and Tuesday. Jess and her husband Morris, some really, really smart people on our consulting team, MIT graduates, and we were talking about like Agile Open Digital, and it was kind of like, it was almost like a structure, governance, and metrics kind of a thing. Okay. And so what's starting to happen, right? So you're starting to see the hardware companies, some of them, start to catch on and realize we have to make our hardware softer, right? We have to make the way that we build machines more adaptive, more agile. And we're starting to see examples where we're rethinking the manufacturing process from the ground up with an eye towards this open, digital, agile kind of methodology. And it's funny because all of that came out of the software world. but the legacy software makers are struggling for the same reason the legacy manufacturers are struggling. Because, and it's easy to understand in a manufacturing context because I have assembly lines and heavy equipment and supply chains and things that are very physical, and they have like hard dollar investments, and they're difficult to change. They really can't be changed. They almost have to be replaced.
Sure.
But on the software side, software is theoretically easier to change, but it becomes so entrenched and so expensive to change. It's almost like the same thing of like,
as hardware, yeah.
You know, I have to replace my plant, my assembly plant in Flint, Michigan, or something like that. And I got to rebuild a new assembly plant. And to some degree, like if you're going to do it, it has to be worth it.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be economically viable to do that. So I'm in this space, like I think there's a ton of thinkers out there. Like as I dig into this, there's so many people out there that are talking about aspects of the problem. Mm-hmm. And I think in aggregate, the knowledge to understand this is here. Like I'm constantly referencing some videos that Joe Justice did around Tesla and SpaceX. You know, I'm thinking about like what the military is doing with that Agile Open Digital DoD spec. You know, I'm looking at like some of the things our clients are experimenting with, so things they're doing well and things that they're doing not well. And I think the information is there. I'm going to lose the guy's name. Dave Hackett, that sounds right. The guy who wrote the Continuous Delivery book. Him and Jez Hubble or something. Like I'm starting to get, I'm probably getting this all mixed up. So
I'll look it up while you're talking.
You know, but I started watching some of his videos this week and around the core principles behind continuous deployment. And I'm just like, Agile Open Digital, right? It's all the same things. And we have to realize it gets underneath this idea that I've been talking about for a long time, or I've been talking about a long time, but I've been kind of on it for the last month or so. The idea of like, what are the preconditions? We can say we want full stack teams. We can say we want continuous deployment. We can say that we want, you know, red, green, refactor. We want all these different things. We want to do Scrum. We want to do daily stand-ups. We want to do small batches and sprint planning. But it's like, but if the systems underneath, either physically or process-wise,
can't do it,
don't support it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't do anything. The example that I was using, and I know you've seen this all over the place. Like if I went into a legacy organization, I'm not even talking about the software, just the org design. I have the analysts, the designers, the builders, the testers, deployers, and vertical silos. And I have project managers running waterfall plans, and I do all the analysis, all the design, all the build, all the test, all the deploy.
Sure.
And I say I want to start doing Scrum. I don't change anything about that organization or its operating model. What people start to do is they start to have analysis sprints, design sprints, build sprints, test sprints, deployment sprints, right? Like, and you sit there and you look at that and you go, okay, cool. Like if you want to do that. If it helps you collaborate better and make things more transparent, like sure, like all day long. But it misses the whole point of why one might want to do Scrum.
Well, okay.
Right? It's not about doing Scrum. It's about the fact that I have a potentially shippable increment. And there's nothing in applying Scrum to a waterfall world that creates a potentially shippable increment at the end of every sprint.
Okay.
A couple user stories worth of design artifacts is not potentially shippable. Like the idea that you're going to potentially ship a partially done amount of analysis,
not
maybe
helpful for anyone. Yeah.
It's not super helpful. Right?
I want to ask you a couple questions.
This is the point of what we're trying to accomplish, right?
So first, the book you reference is called Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble and David Farley.
That was a Hackett. You know what's interesting is that there's a client we have that have a Farley and a Hackett. I kind of mixed. So Dave Farley. Okay, so apologize, Dave. I don't know Dave, but I apologize to him.
You said something. This might be a bit of a tangent, but I want to poke at it. The information is there. People know we should do things. They know they should deal with their technical debt and decouple their systems. We know we should do something about the environment.
People in
the
industry know these things.
Well,
it's
I mean,
not
just as
the
human race as a species right now has information about a bunch of stuff it should do, but we're all just like, 100%. But you know what? I'm going to go watch Netflix.
Well, so Well, so sure, right? So, I mean, there is an element of it's
complacency.
It's complacency. Well, so I'm going to be a little bit more nuanced than that. I was actually thinking about this the other day. It's like I don't think people can envision a world past their current constraints.
Yeah.
Right?
Or
they
current
can't
generation.
Past their current constraints. This is all my job pays. This is the way my family acts.
Yeah.
This is the way my metabolism works. This is, the nature of my commute. I mean, this is how I was brought up. I mean, we just look at what's around us, and I think there's few people that are in sufficient positions of power with the appropriate resources that want to make a sufficient difference to integrate all of this knowledge into a system that will actually work, right? I mean, because you get into this situation, it's like at the lower end of the hierarchy, you have people with insufficient purview and an inability to affect change at a broad level.
So
you get to the top. Let me finish this one thought, right? You get to the top and you have people that are really fundamentally managing a different set of concerns, right? They're trying to manage the macroeconomics of the company. It's probably more political. You think the average CIO, I don't know if this is still true, but it used to be like 16 months, 18 months. And it's like, how much change can I enact on this system? How much runway do I have? Can I put this company on a 7-year journey to refactor its platforms and do it right? I don't know, right?
It's like the people at the team level see the problems, know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
From where they are. The people that are upstairs that can actually have the power to make the decisions are either comfortable or thinking about problems that are not the same problems as the people downstairs. They don't see the value in their concerns.
Well, I tell this story about my son's fiance's father. We've become really good friends with them. We were heading to, they're LSU people, and we were heading to Baton Rouge for a football game. And I don't know how we got on talking this. I was talking with him about technical debt. He's like a chief revenue officer.
Right.
And he was just like, basically, like, he didn't really understand what technical debt was. And the teams were using it. He thought he kind of knew. He had anchored it to something else. He didn't really know. And so that's the reason why I was making the case earlier. It's like the developers have an understanding and the business people have an understanding. It's like somehow, and in this case of business capability versus domain-driven design, I think we're largely talking about the same thing. But I think what happens is that they see that and they look at their legacy monoliths and go, well, like, I don't know how to change that, right?
Yeah, it's too big to change.
Yeah, and so it's like, so I think there's a couple problems. Like the people on the lower side of the organization, it's like, there's like a joke that we're on the receiving end a lot. It's like, what do they say? Like a consultant, like, takes your watch, tells you the time, and sells it back to you, or something like that.
It depends.
And there's this joke that it's like consultants come in and they ask you everything that's wrong, and they put in a report to your management all the things that are wrong, and you have to pay somebody a couple $1 million in order to be listened to. And there's some truth to that, right? But it's like what I generally find is that the ability to storytell and contextualize and make business relevant is a thing, right? And so part of it is that you almost have to connect to like a business driver, a burning platform. Like, we want to move this software to the cloud.
A problem to solve. Yeah.
We have a burning platform. We need to get out of local servers. We want to go to the cloud. We want to do it in the most scalable way. We anticipate growth, all these things. Like, what must we do to do that well? And then you can almost think about like backing into domain-driven design, business capability modeling, that analysis. And you go, well, I can't move this to the cloud with all these dependencies. So what must I do to extract this capability, this domain out, so it has no build time dependencies, right? It can have the runtime dependencies, but it can't have the build time dependencies. It can't have any codependence, right?
Sure.
And so then you work yourself back to that, and then you do the product extraction work, and then the containerization, then you move it to the cloud, and now you have that object in the cloud, right? And so, but it's like, like I have a paper in me I've been noodling on. I Googled it, and I don't think anybody's written what I have in my head, all those similar titles, something to the effect of like, what software execs really need to know about software architecture, or what executives really need to know about software architecture relative to organizational design. The few papers that I saw that were titled something similar was kind of like, yeah, if I wanted my executives to know kind of what I did for a living, and it was like, it was way too technical for me, right? But like the really the principles of encapsulation, orchestration, dependency management, the things that we talk about, right? The impacts, like what is technical debt, the impacts to code quality, the impacts to time to market, the impacts to uptime and downtime, and the ability to make new changes. And it's like execs, I think often, not all, but often won't deeply understand those concepts.
Right.
And what happens in practice is that they're pushing money and resources and people into these organizations and making the problems worse faster. Right? No, seriously, right?
It's one way. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really transparent about this. In the early days of leading Agile, I think we really did some really good work helping organizations deliver faster. But if the adjacent organizations, we got really good in a couple of clients and really helping them put the wrong things into market faster. Now, in my defense, I'm not a strategy consultancy. I wasn't telling them what to do. Like I was helping them put things into market faster. What they were doing with the feedback, like, that wasn't the business we were in at the time. Right. It is the business we're in now, but it's not the business we were in at the time. And so all these pieces have to be wired together in order to create a functioning business,
healthy system.
And that's maybe the interesting pivot. Is we have a client that was trying to figure out, are they a services company or are they a technology company? And what they really kind of came on is that they're technology enabled services.
Okay.
And I think a lot of companies are really like that. They're really like technology enabled services. And there's something that the market wants, a service that it wants to buy, and that's enabled with technology. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think this open agile digital, as I've been thinking about that, I think it applies to hardware. I think it applies to software. I think it applies to organizational design. I think it applies to process. I can't think of an area where it doesn't apply. And then there's this other, I might have mentioned this earlier in the podcast, this idea of composable enterprises. Like once we have these objects, these open objects organizationally, we can start thinking about composing them and deploying them into market in lots of different and creative ways. Mm-hmm. And you don't have that flexibility if everything is a monolith. You have one thing, it does a thing for a customer, a set of customers. What if I had the metaphor? I was doing a more of a standalone talk with our marketing team earlier today, and something entered my head, right? And this idea of open, I'm doing this on a Mac, right? I'm trying to think what rev of the Mac that I have here, right? But this rev of the Mac has like a memory card slot in it.
Yep.
Right. I want to be able to take a memory card, plug it in to the organization, but then take it and plug it into something else, or take somebody else's card and plug it in. Right. So I don't want this proprietary hardwired stuff. Right. I want to be able to have a base system and add peripherals, right? And that there's something in that metaphor, right? I'm sure that somebody's going to be like, "No, Mike, that's stupid." But there's something in the metaphor if you see the truth in it, right?
They'll be happy to leave notes in the comment section.
I'm still working out. Well, I actually have built a little system recently because I got really bad at replying to comments for a while, but I'm learning a lot from the comments, and I really appreciate them. And so I've got a function in my marketing team that when we post stuff out that I get comments, they actually link me to it so I can go and engage with people. And I find it's super useful for me. And I really appreciate anybody that takes the time to help give me clues on how to talk about this stuff better. Mm-hmm. Because what I'm really kind of doing right now is I'm just in this really kind of highly engaged mental set where I'm just like a sponge for stuff, and it's all synthesizing in a really nice way. But I really like this. Like the two things that are really running through my head is this idea of open agile digital and composable organizations. And at the end of the day, it comes back to this thing I've been doing for 15 years now. It's like dependencies suck. They get in the way of agility.
Ooh. Look at you tying that right back in.
You,
way to bring it home. I was sitting here thinking like, how the hell am I going to get us back?
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at going down rabbit holes and holding the thread. As I get older, every once in a while I kind of miss, and I'm like, what were we talking about?
That was good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So have we addressed this one sufficiently?
Yeah, I think so. So what was it? What was ChatGPT's response?
It's not really a very I mean, it says dependencies pose a challenge. They can also foster collaboration. So they're not saying they're bad. They're not saying you shouldn't get rid of them. They're saying, well, people will collaborate.
I wouldn't keep a dependency in place for the sake of collaboration.
Sure.
I would rather have collaboration across very distinct service boundaries.
Yeah.
And so if I need a dependency to foster collaboration, I've got two problems. I got a collaboration problem and I have a dependency problem. And, and it's like, you get this argument that, some dependencies are just necessary. Yeah. But I do think that this idea of runtime versus build time, interdependence versus dependence versus codependence.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's something in that metaphor too, because yes, it's like there are inevitable relationships between objects in complex systems.
Okay.
That is unavoidable. That is different than the kind of the runtime dependencies, build time dependencies that we're talking about. Like we self-impose dependencies all the time. Like we make things connect via requirement that don't have to connect if we just thought about the requirements differently. We introduce dependencies between teams when we do simple things like share QA people between two teams, right? And right. I know if we're Agilists, like maybe we don't need dedicated QA. We're all doing testing on our own. I get it, right? I'm not being dogmatic. In reality, most organizations have QA people, right? So it's like if I'm putting QA people on both teams versus having a shared QA component, I've created a dependency organizationally.
Sure.
Right? If I've separated the software by layer and nothing can be delivered, not even stubbed out or toggled on and off, it all has to be delivered and tested simultaneously, then I've created a dependency that I don't believe any gain in collaboration would be worth the cost of that dependency in terms of my business operations, right?
All right.
So I'm really impressed with ChatGPT's ability to give me a thoughtful response, but I would suggest that AI has not added anything to the conversation at this point.
It's not bringing its game. All right.
Yeah.
Screw you, ChatGPT.
Mike 2, ChatGPT 0 so far. We'll see.
All right, I got two questions for you.
Okay, shoot.
Two totally unrelated random questions that have no bearing on what we're talking about.
Discussions.
First album you ever bought with your own money? And was it an album or was it a cassette?
It was a cassette for sure, right? I turned like 12, 13. Like right as cassettes were coming out, right? So like my dad had albums and they were all over my house, but that was never like albums were never a thing, ever a thing.
Not a thing. Okay.
The first whole album, I can't remember if I paid for it myself, honestly, but the first whole album that I can remember having was Def Leppard's Pyromania.
All right.
That came out, I think, in 83, maybe 82, but I got it in 83, pretty sure.
Okay.
I still am. I kind of drifted away from Def Leppard for a long time, but I kind of reconnected with their older music about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I've seen them. They're phenomenal in concert. I'd go see them any.
All right.
And I'll also tell you, I got to tell you one side story.
Yeah.
So I was like 48. I was like 60 pounds overweight. And Phil Collin, their guitar player, was up on stage at like 58 and just ripped. Up there living his best life, being a rock star.
Yeah.
From a distance, he looked like he was 25 years old still. He looks old like through the face now because he's 60, right? But he's still looking pretty good. And he was like a big part of my inspiration for getting fit. And I decided that I wanted to be a really fit 60-year-old. And I did it like 10 years ahead of schedule. So
now you just get fat again before you turn 60.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I refuse to get fat again.
All right.
I got to tell you one other thing. I got to tell you the first CD I ever had was Driving and Crying, Fly Me Courageous.
Oh, wow. All right.
My wife now, I was dating her at the time. I didn't pay for that with my own money either. There's a pattern here, I guess. She bought it for me for my birthday, and it gave me a little headphone CD player to go with it. So that was pretty cool. It's still one of my favorite albums. I love that album. So.
All right. Now, guitar solo that made you want to pick up a guitar, or a song that made you want to pick up a guitar. What's the song that made you go, I have to get a guitar now?
The one that immediately comes to mind, and it was probably a function of my age at the time and the music that I was interested in, would have been Judas Priest, You Have Another Thing Coming.
Wow.
Like, even to this day, that era of Judas Priest, a couple albums before, a couple albums after. I like the earlier stuff. I even like the later stuff. I still listen to Judas Priest sometimes. But man, like, that song moved me when I was a kid. Like, I just loved it. And to this day, that guitar duo between Glenn Tipton and KK Downing, back in this library
morass of guitars.
I have a Marshall half stack and a 67 reissue Heritage Cherry Flying V that I got so I could be KK Downing. Now, I did it when I was like 36.
Did you get the leather too? You got the whole outfit going?
I used to wear all the stuff, studs on the shoulders and wristbands. And I was kind of one of those crazy heavy metal kids. But I had long hair back when I was in high school, like literally like down to here, long hair. Like my high school picture's pretty funny. And I tried to convince my mom to let me bleach my hair so I could be like KK Downing. And she said, you can have long hair. I don't care. You're not bleaching your hair. And I'm like, and she's like, you'll regret it. And she was right. And I'm glad I didn't do that. So.
All right, that was excellent. Well, thank you.
Yeah, cool. Man. I got answers, man.
These
I got answers,
good.
and I'm an open book.
Good stuff.
So it's all good. Yeah.
All right, thank you, sir. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too, bud. Thank you.